right, we have one more presenter for the second session, Ed Hendel. And he is presenting some really interesting work that I'm eager to hear more about beyond the abstract. He is with Banner, so he's our fourth Banner presenter. And he's going to be presenting once we get this set up. Let's see, what is the title of your talk? Let's see. The title of Ed's talk is Artificial Intelligence to Improve End-of-Life Care. And you get the award for the only AI talk today.
Thank you. All right, thank you. So my name's Ed, and I'm going to talk to you about using artificial intelligence to improve end-of-life care.
Well, this computer's not interested in artificial intelligence.
It's a little scared. Oh, okay. Oh, right, okay. Thank you. So I work at Banner University Health Plans down in Tucson, and we insure Arizona Medicaid members. So the neediest of these members are on a program called the Arizona Long-Term Care System, or ALTEX. And this is generally for elderly and disabled people, generally the neediest, sickest members. A lot of them come onto the plan pretty sick already. And unfortunately, about 20% of them die each year. We do everything we can to help them out and keep them as healthy as we can, but sometimes it's just inevitable. So the question is, what can we do to help these members in the face of this inevitability? So Hospice Care is a program that can make death more comfortable and dignified. It's a personalized form of care for terminal patients or patients at high risk of death. One nice thing about it is that it can take place in the comfort of your own home, so you're not in a hospital. It really focuses on pain management and emotional and spiritual support for both the patient and the family. And so it can be, it's a little more about accepting the situation and kind of being as happy as you can, rather than trying to do procedures to prolong the person's life. Like I said, it's at home instead of a hospital. It's more comfortable, so you're not getting these invasive surgeries to prolong your life by a few extra months. You're not, there's not all these machines beeping and doctors, hustling and bustling about. It's just a lot more comfortable. People think it's more dignified. So for people who want to do this, it's often a very good program. It's also 20% less expensive than dying in a hospital, which is a nice bonus because end-of-life care is a very expensive part of the American healthcare system. As you all know, I'm sure our healthcare spending is kind of out of control right now, and end-of-life care is a disproportionate fraction of that spending. There's some debate in the field about exactly how disproportionate it is, but people seem to generally agree that it's a lot. So that's a nice thing about hospice as well. So why doesn't everybody sign up for hospice when the end is near? Why do we have so few people enrolled right now? So we have about a third of our members on ALTEX. About a third of the deaths occur on hospice. So why isn't that higher? Well, one reason is that a lot of members just don't know about it. It's not always easy to discuss these types of things. So sometimes it just never comes up. Also, it can be a little bit difficult to enroll in this program. I mean, it takes some paperwork, there's some bureaucracy, you have to get approval from a doctor, so that means you have to go to the doctor, there's a few steps involved. So that's a big part of why so few people are on this program. On a personal note, my grandpa actually died just a few months ago. And it was really sad for everybody, of course, but one nice thing is that he was on hospice. And so that made it a lot more peaceful for him and the family. He was in his own home. he was comfortable, he's surrounded by a familiar setting, he's not, getting different nurses coming in all the time. He's got one person who comes and takes care of him at his house. It was also very comforting for my mom and my whole family and me, knowing that he was comfortable. So that was really nice for him, and I want to try to help more people enroll in this. But the problem is, it took my mom a lot of effort to get him enrolled in hospice. It's, like I said, some paperwork. You have to get approval from the doctor. And she had to fight pretty hard and jump through a lot of hoops to get through this. So not everyone on our Altex program has someone like my mom to do that. They don't always, and they often can't do it themselves. They may have, Alzheimer's, something like that. They might not be able to navigate the whole process themselves. And if they don't have anybody else to help them, what are they going to do? So that's on us as their health plan. We want to help them do that. And so that's what this project is about. So the goal here is to use machine learning to predict death and then offer hospice to the high-risk members. So in order to get on hospice, probably the most important hoop that you have to jump through is you have to get approval from a doctor. The doctor has to agree that this member is likely to die within 6 months. And so what we want to do is predict who is likely to die within 6 months, and then refer those members to the care managers and the doctors to kind of help get this process moving if the member wants to do it. So we make the predictions, we send the high-risk members to the care managers. These care managers are actually seeing the patients pretty regularly. They go to their house about every 3 months or so. And so what they would do is next time they're at the patient's house, they would bring up hospice and discuss it, explain it. The patient can ask any questions they have. They'll also explain it to the family members. The family can ask any questions. And if everybody's on board and the patient wants to be enrolled in this program, we will help them get enrolled. So this targeted approach is more effective for the care managers because there's just not enough time for them to do this with every single member. They have a huge caseload, they work really hard, they're great people, they just have a ton of work to do. And so any way that we can make their job more efficient is really important. It's also nice for the members because now you get this personal explanation, you can ask any questions you have, there's not going to be any pressure, you can just kind of discuss it and see if it's something you'd be interested in. And this is much more effective than a generic letter or a phone call or anything like that. It's a one-on-one personal discussion, and that's a good way to educate the members. So how do we do our part on the machine learning end? So a lot of you guys have talked about machine learning already. I'll kind of go through the way we did it. The first step is to gather your data, so features being the data types. So members regularly fill out these health surveys. Every time the care manager goes to a member's house, which like I said is about every 3 months, they fill out this long survey of health information. It's 184 questions. It's a lot of stuff like, how much help do you need in the, eating or showering? What kind of medical equipment do you need every day? Just stuff like that, tons of stuff. It's a great data source for us. We then supplement those surveys with data from our claims system, which is another treasure trove of data for us. So we've got chronic diseases, we've got the amount of money that has been spent on this member's claims, both medically and at the pharmacy. We've got the number of recent hospitalizations that this member has had, and we have their demographic information, just age, county, gender, etc. And when you combine all this together, you get 329 features for a pretty rich data set for each member every time they fill out the survey. Then our label for machine learning is just a yes or no, did the member end up dying within 6 months after filling out that survey? So we have this historical record of all these old surveys. We see, we just check for each one, did the member end up dying within 6 months of filling it out? So now that we have our data, we need to train a machine learning model to make the predictions. So we use logistic regression. A lot of you guys have mentioned that in the prior talks. So we just figure out which features correlate the most with that yes or no label, and that's called training the model. It gives each feature a weight that's just a measure of how much it correlates essentially with that yes or no label, which is whether the member died within 6 months. So the machine figures out which of these 329 features matter the most, it ranks them all and gives them weights, and that's training the model. For anyone curious, we use SQL for data mining, and we use Python and scikit-learn for the machine learning. Now, step 3 is just to use the model to make predictions. So for every new survey that comes in, which is every member every 3 months, the model makes a prediction of how likely that member is to die within 6 months. We send the list of the highest risk members to the care managers, and the care managers carry out the intervention I described before, where they go to the members, or well, next time they're at the member's home, they ask them about hospice, educate them, educate the family, and if the patient is interested, help them enroll. So I won't get too much into this, but it's kind of fun just to look at. So logistic regression shows you the how much each feature correlates with death. And just here's a few highlights. It's kind of interesting to look at. You don't want to get too quantitative about this, but it's fun to look at. So some high-risk features: old age, whether they require professional assistance around the house each day, breast cancer, heart failure, incontinence. Those are all high risk for death within 6 months. Some protective features, which means it correlates highly with not dying in 6 months. No substance abuse in the past week is helpful. If they have no behavioral health services, that helps. I guess that, you want to be careful about drawing too many inferences here, but it might mean that they're just generally a little bit healthier. This one's kind of interesting, reassessment. So the first assessment, the first survey that the member takes when they come onto the plan, that's called the initial assessment. Every survey after that, every 3 months after that, is called a reassessment. And so if the survey is a reassessment, that itself is predictive of not dying, which presumably just means, they've been stable, they've been on the plan for at least 3 months, it shows some level of stability in their health, and they're reasonably likely to make it another 3 months. A lot of members actually join Altex, and from day 1, they're terminal. So, those members, some of the highest risk members don't even make it through the first 3 months, unfortunately. So the model has a high accuracy score, and it improves the efficiency of the care managers. So when we make our predictions, we mark the top 15% of them as high risk. 33% of those members will die within 6 months. For machine learning people, that's the positive predictive value. If you just randomly sampled the members, you would get only a 10% rate here. Only 10% of the high-risk members only 10% of the members would die within 6 months. So if you referred everybody to care management and did this intervention on every single person, you'd only have a 10% success rate. We've improved that up to 33%. That's a 3-fold improvement in the care manager efficiency, which is very important because, as I said before, our care managers have an enormous caseload. They work really hard, and any way that we can help them improve their efficiency is helpful for them and the members. And the ROC-AUC score, also known as the C statistic, is 0.8. So that's on a scale from 0 to 1. 0.5 is random, 1 is a perfect model. 0.8 is pretty good. It's a good way to kind of compare different models from different fields and stuff. So I think 0.8 is good. We're happy with that. That just means it's good at predicting yes versus no. Is this member going to die or not within the next 6 months? So it's a pretty good model, and that's really important for our care managers. Now the next steps here, so this model was just implemented a few months ago in January. One thing we want to do, of course, is track the members that we deem to be high risk. We want to see if they actually do end up passing away within 6 months, just to see how accurate our model is. Now when we scored the model originally, we held back some of the training data, that's called testing data, and you use that to find your score. That's where we got the ROC-AUC score on the previous slide. And so that should be right, but you still want to keep tracking it going forward. You want to see if your model is holding up as the future comes, and just hold yourself accountable. So we'll track that status. We're also going to see among the members who had an intervention, how many of them enrolled in hospice. Is this actually helping to increase our hospice rates? If not, why not? We just want to, we don't want to abandon this thing, so we're going to track everything. When we get around to version 2 of this model, we're going to make some improvements. We're going to include other data sources which should improve the accuracy of the model. So we can include procedure codes, which would be, what kind of surgeries they've had, things like that, and what medications they're on, what medications they were on in the past. I believe these things are likely to improve the accuracy of the model. We also want to explore other algorithms like neural networks. We tried a few different models. We tried random forest. We ended up going with logistic regression. They all kind of scored roughly the same. It seems to me that the quality of your data set is much more important for your final predictive scores than which algorithm you pick. But, it'd be fun and interesting to try some new ones, and who knows, we might get a higher score with some of these deep learning algorithms, so I would like to try that. The best thing about this is that the model will automatically improve over time. You don't even have to touch it, because as the months go by, you get more and more training data in your training set as these surveys continue to come in, because we're actually retraining the model every single time it's run. We didn't just train it once and stick with those coefficients and weights the entire time through. We retrain it, and this is all happening automatically. It retrains every single time, so every time it gets new surveys coming in, it's got more training data, it should get more accurate. So even just sitting back and watching, it should get better. Another next step, we want to build more predictive models. So I actually just finished a project a couple weeks ago to predict which pregnant mothers on our health plan are likely to have low birth weight babies, so that we can refer those high-risk members to a care manager and get them proper nutritional care, make sure they're going to the doctor, try to prevent this baby from being born with a low birth weight. That could really help the baby's life for the whole duration of its life. It's just going to be good for our members. So we're, that just went live a few weeks ago. We'll also track our progress there and see how that goes. We've got a few other models. We did one similar to Mari's project that she described this morning with predicting hospitalization. So we've got a few of these, but I'm always interested to hear any ideas you guys may have for more projects like this. We're always looking, so definitely feel free to reach out and talk to me if you have any ideas. I'd love to hear it. Just a few quick conclusions. So my main conclusion here is that designing an effective machine learning project can be pretty difficult, both from a technical side and a business side. So from a technical side, you need a pretty large sample size, obviously. You need a lot of data. You also need a clear label, and you need a high prevalence for that label, meaning it has to happen relatively often. So the label here is death within 6 months, and the prevalence is 20%. That's not bad. If you're trying to pick something, if you're trying to predict something that's extremely rare, you're going to have trouble making a good model for it. So you got to design your project accordingly. But the most important thing isn't on the technical side, it's on the business side. I believe that every machine learning model must be accompanied by an intervention to actually help the members about whom you are making your predictions. I don't want this model to just sit on my computer and be a cool thing I made. I want it to help the members in some way. So I want my predictions to go to a team of care managers and have them perform an intervention. But that's hard to do because you have to get buy-in from across the company. You have to get, your managers all have to sync up. Everyone in the care management team has to be on board. They have to understand what you're doing and have some buy-in and interest in it. It can be tricky to get that all set up. But I really think that's the most important part of all this, because if we don't act on our predictions, what are we really doing here? And I'd like to acknowledge Brian, who's here in the audience. Thank you for being a great coworker and friend. You were really helpful with this project. And these others are Renee and Kim and Dr. Ball are in the leadership, so thank them for trying to kind of get this whole thing set up. Dan Koster is the head of the care management team, and he's essential, as I was just saying. You know, he's actually probably the most essential person in this because he's the person who arranges for these interventions to occur. Here's my contact info. I would love to talk to you guys if you have any suggestions for how to improve this model, or better yet, ideas for new projects, new models. So please do connect with me and email me, and I would love to talk to you. And with that, I'll take any questions. Thank you.
Can you talk a little about how the front end for the model looks like in terms of what goes into the model, the different variables that one has to put in order to get a prediction? Also, have you looked into like reducing the number of inputs that the model would require and not suffer too much in terms of the predictability? So right now you're at, I believe, 0.8. One of the challenges is the burden on somebody who puts in. So you might have, say, 25 to 30 variables that you need to put in order to get a good predictability. But if you can reduce that down to like 5 or 6, it becomes easier for somebody to put in those, and then it helps them. It makes it easier.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. So. Actually, the nice thing about this is that the whole project is fully automated. It doesn't require anybody to input any variables at all. So there's not like a human inputting all these variables just for this model. There are humans inputting the results of the surveys into our data system, but that's actually not for our project specifically. That's used all throughout the company. So we're just kind of taking the data that's already sitting there on the server and using it. This whole thing, thanks to Brian, is fully automated every single month. And so there's no efficiency gains in using fewer data points. However, if you use too much data, or too many columns of data rather, you're right that you can get some overfitting. We've tried L1 and L2 penalties to kind of try to reduce that. It doesn't seem to make much of a difference because the model will just assign low coefficients for features that have that aren't important. So actually a lot of our 329 features have a coefficient of 0, which means they just don't matter one way or the other. So there's no need from the business side to reduce the number of features, but it is good to look at that for overfitting. For your first question, or did I answer your question fully? Or you had a prior question as well? Oh, okay, thanks.
All right, we have a question here, right?
You said you tried different models. Did you look at a log binomial or a Poisson rather than a Logistic?
No, I actually didn't try that one.
That'll give you a relative risk rather than an odds ratio? Because you said 20% died within 6 months?
20% die each year.
Each year, okay.
Yeah.
And that was within 15% that were at risk. So only 15% were at risk, and then of that 15%,
Oh, okay.
a third died.
Okay, so I was
That's right.
concerned about the rare events
Right.
assumption, so
Right.
maybe you might try that though.
Yeah,
Log binomial.
the model assigns a probability to every single member.
Oh,
How
okay.
likely are they to die within 6 months? We take the top 15% of those, so 85th percentile and up, and we deem those to be high risk.
Oh,
Now, how did we pick 15%? A couple ways. One is just that's kind of where if you look at the calibration curve, that's kind of where it flattens out. Everybody over that percentile is roughly equally probable to die. Also, there's a sizing factor here, so we need to make sure that we give the care managers an appropriate number of people. This is usually for our machine learning projects. The thing that determines where we draw this cutoff of who is high risk and who isn't is how many interventions can be performed. If it's a really time-consuming intervention, maybe we can only give them 15 people a month. That's the case for our low birth weight intervention. They can only handle 15 a month. It's a pretty intense intervention. They are very overbooked as is. So we size it to perfectly fit what the care managers want. In this project, they can handle a little bit more, so we can use the calibration curve to look at that.
Okay, so only the top 15% go in the model?
No, so everyone goes into the model.
Okay, so
The top 15% are the ones that we deem to be high risk, and those are the people that we send to the care managers for intervention.
Okay, got it. So yeah, you might want to try that. I mean, just to check
Okay.
the precision of your estimate.
Yeah, Poisson, you said?
Log binomial or
Binomial,
Enroll
okay.
Poisson. Yeah,
Okay.
see which one fits
Thank you.
best.
I'll look at that, thanks.
Yeah, I'd also be interested if you lowered that, or if you increased that 15%, how will it perform, right? So if you move it
Yeah.
from 15 to 12 or 15 to 18, does it not budge the performance?
So it doesn't affect the C statistic, the ROC AUC score. That is independent of where you pick your cutoff. And that's why it's a good metric to use to compare models, to compare different models for different projects, because it's independent of where you
Right.
draw that cutoff line. However, the positive predictive value, that 33%
Right.
you're referring to, is very dependent on where you draw the cutoff. So if you want, you could give a smaller, you could do the 99th percentile, give them a much smaller list of high-risk members, and almost all of them would die within 6 months.
Right. I'm curious if, what was the positive predictive value then?
At
At
a higher cutoff,
different thresholds.
I'd have to check, but I think you can get it arbitrarily high. I think we got it like above 50% with a 90% cutoff. I'd have to check. Don't quote me on that.
Right, typically you can, in my practice, I'll move that threshold and see where it performs most with the greatest stability
Yeah.
within a certain margin.
Well, the problem, that's a good idea. The problem is that it reduces the sensitivity. So if you raise that cutoff, you're going to be missing more people. So with our current cutoff, about half of the people who end up dying will be on our list. If you raise the cutoff, a lot fewer of them would make the list. So it's always kind of a balancing act. But really the most important thing is sizing it to what the care managers have the capacity for.
Right, I see that's the rate limiting step, the resource.
Yeah.
Does anybody else have questions?
Thank you, appreciate it. By the way, great work.
Thank you.
I appreciate that. I'm a big fan of machine learning as well. So, a couple of questions. So the first one is that I'm pretty sure you're aware that there are basically softwares that we installed and are pretty expensive to do machine learning, right? So it seems to me that you just basically have a pipeline using Python, using Scikit to do that. Is this correct?
That is correct. The data comes from Oracle SQL developer, and we bring it into Python. We use Jupyter notebooks. Well, not in the production model. We just use regular Python for that. It all happens within Python, and Python's free, which is nice.
That's right, I like Python too. So the second question is, in terms of models, I'm pretty sure you're aware, like there's a plethora of models, right? One of them, like instead of basically logistic regression, you could do an SPM, which is another common one to use. I would say that, yes, neural networks would be an interesting, basically, algorithm to use as well, because they show that they could beat a lot of algorithms now. So
Yeah, we did try neural networks for our hospitalization model. Brian did that, and he found that it actually had a slightly lower score than simple regression. But I mean, that's just an n equals 1. That's almost, that's anecdotal. So, but I definitely intend to try that. I would love to try neural networks. If nothing else, just because it would be a great learning experience for me, but I think it might improve our scores as well.
thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we have time for one more question.
One quick question and then a follow-up to that. You said that you're using over 300 predictors in this?
Yeah, 329 features.
And not all of them are actually significant?
That's right. Not all of them are significant.
Okay, so it's an unpruned model that you're running, correct?
What was the word? Unpruned?
Unpruned, so you haven't
Yeah.
actually gone through and trimmed out any of the non-significant predictors?
That's correct, although the L1 penalty kind of does that for you, but you're right that we're not directly doing that.
Okay, I've done this kind of thing before, and are you running into any issues with singularity or with predictors that are actually interacting? Because that can happen, and it can really spoil your model or lower its effectiveness. So that might be something that you want to look at down the road, is to trim some of those non-effective predictors out. First of all, it saves you time because you're not trying to pull all that data. And it can prevent things like issues with singularity, multicollinearity that can really attenuate some of those predictors in your model. So you gotta watch that.
Yeah, I'd love to talk to you after this about that, because that is something I've wondered about. I guess we would like to look into that more. It doesn't seem to be the big problem right now. The score seems to be pretty good, and I haven't noticed any problems with that, but I would love to talk to you about that. That sounds interesting.
There's actually some literature that's out within the last year that shows that even when you throw in way too much, it looks like everything and the kitchen sink, that you don't lose much error, because a lot of those lower significance variables are actually corollaries for something else that makes it worthwhile to include, and that if you trim out the top 20% or the bottom 20%, you're not going to lose much in your model. And I'm not sure if I've bought into that yet. I'm still studying that literature, but that's what's really being used for genetic risk prediction scores.
And to add to that, this isn't exactly what you're describing, but we did we did check for overfitting by keeping some of the data separate and testing on that. So we know that the one common problem with using so many features is that you get overfitting. In our case, we don't have that particular issue, so that helps a bit. Yeah, Gil.
So I have a question about the comment you made about it being that the model process would be improved over time because you're adding more data to it, to the training set. So is there an opportunity to look at that a different way? Because it seems like if you're collecting data on the members every 3 months, then you have good longitudinal data, and it seems like the end of life would benefit from looking at a longitudinal track rather than adding it just to the number of records.
Absolutely. That's I didn't put it on the slide, but you're right. That's one of the highest things on my personal list of ways to improve this model, is to have, looking at a degradation in somebody's records. So if we have their surveys every 3 months, and we see that the survey itself is fairly steady, their answers aren't changing that much, that should be a variable in our model. That we could call it stability or something, and show that this member is not changing much. In contrast, if their answers on the questions about how much help do you need around the house have gone from a not very much to a little bit to a lot, we want to look at that derivative kind of, and that would be an important feature. So that's a great point. It's some tricky SQL work to do that, but it is something I intend to do, and that most likely will improve the model.
Thank you, Ed.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I just had a quick thought. Are you testing any interaction terms at all, or these are all just straight manufactured sources?
Yeah, it's just straight, but it doesn't seem to cause much of a problem, because like if we've got two features that correlate with each other, and then it gives them coefficients that might not be quite perfect because one of them maybe one of them's causing the other, so one of them should have a 0 coefficient and the other should have a higher coefficient. But when we take out the one that's correlated, the model kind of figures it out and the score ends up not changing. So we have looked into that.
Yeah, I'm not so concerned about collinearity, but interaction, moderating effects, multiplicative terms.
Oh, I see what you mean. The logistic regression wouldn't catch that, so you're right, that's a good point. And that is a good reason to try another model. We haven't tried multiplicative effects. That engineering it ourselves would be a little tricky. It would just be a lot of kind of guesswork. So I'd rather find an algorithm that kind of tests them for you.
Sure.
So I'd love to talk to you afterwards if you have suggestions for that, because you're right that logistic regression won't cover that, and that's something that definitely could improve the accuracy of the model.
All right, well, thanks, Ed. You're
Thank you.
you're very involved.